Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Business Innovation and Investor Visa Seminar. My name is Yin Chiew. I'm a practice leader in the corporate immigration team at LegalVision. Just want to extend a very warm welcome and thank you for participating in this webinar today. Before we begin, you will be emailed a copy of this webinar recording. Feel free to submit your questions in the chat box while the webinar is running, and there'll be a time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. And we would really appreciate if you could complete the survey after the webinar as well. So I just want to run through the actual content of the webinar, and we will be talking about the Business Innovation and Investor Visa, and particularly the 4 streams. First is, what is the objective of this program in accordance with the Department of Home Affairs? What are the general common criteria and process, also in accordance with the migration regulations? And what have been the key changes that took effect from 1 July 2021? We'll also discuss the pathway from the business innovation stream from the provisional visa to the permanent visa, and identifying New South Wales as the appropriate state of nomination. And we will also discuss briefly the permanent residency pathway. And there will be, as I explained, a time to ask questions at the end for me to answer them. And then I will tell you a bit about our LegalVision's special offer. So just to give you an overview of the purpose of the program, it's really designed for applicants that can demonstrate that they have owned a successful business and they've been essentially business innovators in their field, or investors. So those that want to come to Australia to start a business or to purchase a business or to invest and contribute to the growth of the Australian economy. So some of the common criteria, and when I discuss or when I explain what is the common criteria, I'm really referring to the requirements under the migration regulations. And that, simply put, is that there will be an age requirement. You typically need to be under the age of 55. However, applicants that are over the age of 55 can still be considered for this visa. They just need to meet sort of more higher threshold, meaning they have to show how they can be an exceptional benefit to the Australian economy. They do need to meet a points threshold, which is typically at 65, and the points table identifies certain criteria where you can gain or obtain points for, such as your age, your business history, your investment history, your asset threshold, your turnover threshold, things like that. The next step is, once there has been an assessment of the applicant's ability to meet the points threshold and suitability for the Business Innovation and Investor Program, the next step is to submit an expression of interest. Now, that's not an application. It is essentially what I've named it to be, an expression of interest to the Department of Home Affairs, expressing your desire to be considered for this program. The next step is to apply for state or territory or potentially Austrade nomination. Now, this is a key requirement of the Business Innovation and Investor Visa for all the 4 streams. It does require state nomination. And we will talk about this in a bit more detail, where if you are electing a particular state to nominate you, or you want to apply to a particular state to nominate you, there will be additional criteria that the states will identify that you would need to also meet in addition to the common criteria. The Business Innovation and Investor Visa Program is a 2-stage process, meaning a 2-stage procedure to permanent residency. So the first step is the applicant applies for the provisional visa, which is the subclass 188 in one of the relevant streams. And then after a certain period of time of being on that visa, they can, if they're eligible, apply for permanent residency via the subclass 888. So let's discuss about the key changes that took effect from 1 July 2021. And to give you an idea of the climate or the overview of the Business Innovation and Investor Visa Program pre 1 July 2021, there were essentially 5 streams, and one that's missing from the subclass 188 is the Premium Investor Visa. There was also a direct permanent residency pathway via the subclass 132. So post 1 July 2021, the subclass 188, the provisional visa, has been consolidated into 4 streams: the business innovation, the investor, the significant investor, and entrepreneurial stream. So the government has essentially abolished the premium investor stream and the direct permanent residency pathway, which is the subclass 132. So if you have received an invitation to apply for the older streams pre 1 July 2021, you'll still be bound by those conditions and requirements. But if you receive an invitation after 1 July 2021, then these 4 streams will apply to you. So we're going to talk about the key changes that occurred for each stream. So as you can see in the PowerPoint, before 1 July 2021, the personal and business net assets that an applicant would have to meet was about 800,000. That has since increased post 1 July 2021 to 1.25 million. So that means if you've received an invitation after 1 July 2021 and you want to apply for the business innovation stream, you must be able to demonstrate that your personal and business net assets total at least 1.25 million. This is Australian dollars. Similarly, the government also assesses what your business's turnover has been in the last 2 out of 4 fiscal years. So pre 1 July 2021, you had to demonstrate that the turnover for your main qualifying business was at least 500,000. That has since increased to $750,000. So moving on to the next stream, which is the investor stream. And this is really for applicants that want to actually invest in specific Australian investments. So again, from the table, you can see that the actual net value of eligible assets, this is an assessment of the eligible investments that you've held for the last 3 years. And pre 1 July 2021, they needed to have totaled at least 1.5 million. But post 1 July 2021, it now needs to be 2.5 million. So there has been quite a significant increase for that criteria. Similarly to if you are in relation to your personal and business net assets, that has increased from 2.25 million to 2.5 million. A bit more of a minor increase, but still an increase as well. Probably one of the key changes is that as part of the investor stream of the business innovation and investor visa, before 1 July 2021, you had to make at least 1.5 million, or you had to invest at least 1.5 million into designated investments. And they were quite confined to government bonds or quite specific investment portfolios. After 1 July 2021, you now need to invest into complying significant investments of at least 2.5 million. And that essentially means that you need to engage a fund manager that is an Australian financial licensed fund manager to essentially manage those compliant significant investments for you. Again, with the third stream, which is the significant investor visa, and this typically requires the applicant to invest 5 million into compliant significant investments. What has changed is that the breakdown of investments has changed from pre-1 July and then post-1 July. So at the moment now, how the 5 million is to be divided in those complying investments is that at least 1 million must be invested into venture capital and growth private equity funds. At least 1.5 million needs to be invested into approved managed funds, and the remainder, which is 2.5 million, needs to be invested into balancing investments. Now, this is very much going to be a discussion and engagement with the relevant fund manager. A lot of the fund managers will have their own particular products that will meet these criteria, and they understand that these are the investment breakdowns that need to be made for the applicant to meet the criteria of this stream. Now, quite interestingly, the entrepreneurial stream has also gone through some significant changes. So pre-1 July 2021, it was mandatory for the applicant to demonstrate that they had received external funding of at least 200,000, this is again in Australian dollars, from one of the approved funding entities, and there's a list of them in the slide as well. Now, post 1 July 2021, there's no longer that requirement to show that you have obtained the required amount of funding. However, because this visa, and particularly for any of these streams, are state nominated, some of the states will require you to still demonstrate that you have received some funding. Some of them actually don't specify a particular amount, but some of them will want you to demonstrate you've received some funding from external entities, and they may very well list some of the approved entities that you should receive funding from in order for them to nominate you for the purposes of this visa and for the purposes of this stream as well. So what I want to talk about today is we're going to use New South Wales as an example. It's not going to be possible to sort of discuss every stream and then the state criteria for every stream as well. So we're going to use the first stream, business innovation stream, and consider what additional state criteria from a New South Wales government perspective is required for an applicant to essentially be eligible to apply for this visa under this stream. So New South Wales requires that you are under the age of 50. Now, this is for any location that you may want to migrate to. This is Sydney metropolitan and then regional New South Wales locations as well. And I just want to steer you back to our previous slide where we explained in the common criteria, according to the migration regulations, you had to be under 55 to apply for this visa under the business innovation stream. However, if you want New South Wales to nominate you, you actually have to be under 50. So there is a bit of an inconsistency there, but that's because the state criteria is also equally important, if not more prevalent than the common criteria. Again, you still need to meet 65 points. And that is an assessment of your age, your business history, your main qualifying business's turnover, your educational qualifications, things like that. New South Wales also wants the applicant to demonstrate that they have a relevant bachelor's degree, and we'll talk about whether it's any bachelor degree or whether it's a bachelor degree in one of the target sectors in a moment. They also want you to show that you have a business plan or business proposal where it focuses on the growth of any business that you intend to purchase or any business that you intend to establish, and that growth includes creating jobs, hiring Australian workers, and what that in terms looks like. So there's sort of two types of businesses that an applicant may consider under the business innovation stream. This is a brand new business that they're establishing, so they may very well be an established business professional, and they want to transfer their business from overseas and establish it in Australia. You would have to prepare a business plan for the purposes of New South Wales state nomination to show how you plan to expand that newly established business to create jobs and to increase revenue and to also benefit the Australian economy. And then similarly, if you were to go down the route of purchasing an existing business in Australia, you would then have to show how, or the business plan would have to show how you would then elevate that existing business, how you plan to grow it even further. So again, New South Wales will have criteria around what asset threshold you need to meet based on the location that you want to migrate to, and then what business investment commitment that you need to make as well. So the first part is for applicants that want to migrate to Sydney metropolitan region, they need to show that their combined net personal and business assets is at least 1.75 million. Now, for regional, it is 1.25 million. Now, when we consider the common criteria under the migration regulations, you can see that the New South Wales nomination criteria for demonstrating assets, net assets, is much higher. So if you want New South Wales to nominate you, you actually have to show that your net assets are much higher. Now, when we talk about combined net assets, we're really talking about all your assets and that of your spouses, if you have a spouse as well. But we're really not talking about sort of your dependents or your whole family or anything like that. It's really just the primary applicant and their immediate partner. Now, New South Wales also requires that once they nominate you for the subclass 188, the provisional business visa, so this is something you can do after the provisional visa is granted, for the purposes of then for them nominating you for the permanent residency visa, the subclass 888, they require you to show that during the validity of your provisional business visa that you made a business investment of at least 500,000 if you're based in Sydney metropolitan area, or 300,000 if you're based in a regional New South Wales area. Sorry, going back to the previous slide, what should be noted is there is very strict criteria around what is a business commitment investment in accordance with New South Wales. And that typically does not mean you purchasing a property to rent out and then acquire passive income. It's actually a business investment into your newly established business or your existing business that you've purchased. And that can include things like, equipment, purchasing actually a building premise, or anything relating to the goodwill of the business as well. So it's quite specific. It's not just any kind of business investment. Okay, so New South Wales also has specific target sectors. So they want to nominate applicants that will be either establishing a new business or purchasing an existing business in one of these target sectors, and they're categorized into locations. So in Sydney, there's a list there, and there's emphasis on the business being in advanced manufacturing, food and beverage manufacturing, aerospace and defense. I won't read the whole thing out to you, but as you can see, it's quite a high level business. So it wouldn't be simply just establishing a restaurant, for instance, and that wouldn't normally fall into food and beverage manufacturing sector. But if the business was around actually manufacturing some kind of food or beverage, that's quite innovative, then that could be a business that New South Wales will consider falls into one of their target sectors if you want to migrate to Sydney metropolitan area. Now, if you're wanting to migrate to regional New South Wales, then the target sectors are a little bit more condensed, but they still similarly relate to things like recycling and waste management, critical minerals. So this slide is just really a brief summary of the pathway from provisional to permanent residency, and then the proposed timeline that it would take from, for instance, if you decide to engage LegalVision to assist you, we normally start with performing an eligibility assessment, and that's quite crucial to assess whether you can meet all the criteria, whether any supporting documents will be acceptable by the department. Most of the sort of documentation that you have to provide for any of the streams, and particularly the business innovation stream, is financial documents. So things that evidence how your main qualifying businesses have performed, documents that show your combined net business and personal assets as well. So we conduct an initial assessment first, and it's quite a thorough assessment, taking into account all the relevant documents and your particular situation. Once we assess that you're actually suitable and there are good prospects of success in applying for this visa, then the next step is to submit an expression of interest, and that's via Skill Select. That, again, as I explained, is not an application, it's merely an expression of interest. Simultaneously, or in parallel, you would also be applying for state nomination. So in this webinar, we've only covered New South Wales criteria only for the purpose of the business innovation stream. But New South Wales will have criteria or additional criteria for all the other three streams as well. Similarly, all the states will also have their own criteria as well. So that will always be part of the initial eligibility assessment, is understanding which states you're interested in, doing an overview of each of the states' criteria, and then obtaining instructions around which state you want to apply to for them to nominate you for the purpose of this visa. So once the expression of interest and the invitation, the state nomination application is submitted, once you receive an approval from the state nomination, very soon after that, you're likely to receive an invitation from the Department of Home Affairs to apply for the actual visa. Once you receive the invitation, you have 60 days to apply for the visa. So it's quite a strict timeline. So often you would have to get all your affairs in order, or if you're engaging a legal representative or migration agent, then they would have all these documents ready to submit the 188 visa application within that 60-day time frame. Okay, then it does take a little while for the visa to be processed. Sometimes it could take 6 months, 9 months, up to 12 months sometimes. These visas are priority processed, but they still take a bit of time to assess by the Department of Home Affairs. So once it's granted, then you're on a provisional subclass 188 visa in your particular stream, and that visa is valid for 5 years. Now, the time frame to do all those steps for the 188 visa is about 9 to 12 months. So once you're granted the provisional business visa in the relevant stream, and that visa is valid for 5 years, you don't have to typically wait the full 5 years to then apply for the permanent residency visa. There are certain cutoffs, deadlines, depending on the stream. But when you're ready, or when you're eligible to apply for the permanent residency visa, the first step is applying for state nomination. So state nomination is required for both the provisional and permanent residency visa. Okay, but you don't need to submit another expression of interest. Now, obviously, if you return back to the same legal representative, they will often have all your details as well. There is also a period where the legal representative will support you or assist you to accumulate all the relevant documentation during the validity of your provisional business visa. So by the time you're ready to apply for the permanent residency visa, typically they should have everything ready for you to go. So first step is state nomination. And then once the state again approves their nomination of you for the permanent residency visa, you will receive an invitation to apply for the actual visa from the Department of Home Affairs. Again, you have 60 days to apply for that visa, and then you submit the visa application and then it gets granted. That indicative time frame from start to finish is about 6 to 9 months. So what is essentially required for you to be eligible for permanent residency? And again, I'm only using the business innovation stream criteria and also then New South Wales nomination criteria. So for business owners, you must show that in the 2 years immediately before applying for the permanent residency visa, actually submitting the subclass 888 visa application, that you owned a business. So that could be the business that you originally purchased or established for the purposes of the provisional visa, and that you had direct and continuous management of that business. So that's really important to note, that the Department of Home Affairs and New South Wales and any of the relevant states really will want you to demonstrate that you were actively involved in the management, decision-making, operation of that business, that business was not a business that ran independently and where you were passively involved in it. So the key to establishing what is direct and continuous management of the business is, were you the individual that made key strategic decisions around the operation, the growth, and the management of the business? Okay. You will also have to show the business's financial performance over a period as well. So this would typically be your business activity statements that you've submitted to the Australian Taxation Office during the operation of the business. Now, you also then have to show what your business's turnover has been throughout those last 2 years. And this is very much dependent on your ownership capacity within that business. Now, I'm not going to read that out to you, that's quite clear. So if I take the first bullet point, for example, if you own 51% of the business, so if you're a shareholder that owns 51% and your other shareholders earn the remainder, then the business's turnover needs to be at least 400,000 that you must show in the last 2 years. Now, you also need to satisfy residence requirements as well. This is also a little bit tricky, but in terms of residence requirements, the Department of Home Affairs does take quite a relaxed view around it. And then at the same time, which is what we spoke about in the original slide, New South Wales will also want you to demonstrate, if you're wanting New South Wales to nominate you, that you've made that business commitment investment. So as I explained, that business commitment investment needs to be things that you have invested into the business by way of equipment, purchasing an actual business premise, or any sort of goodwill that pertains to the business. So this is not, again, purchasing any kind of real estate for the purposes of earning passive income. So that pretty much concludes our high-level business innovation and investor webinar today. We have created a guide on the business innovation and investor visas and all the streams. So feel free to download them, and you can access this as part of a handout after this webinar as well. So there's some time for question and answers, and I'll just open up my screen to potential questions. Okay, so there were some pre-questions, and I'm going to answer them first. The first is assistance in obtaining a visa for a business partner that wishes to invest in my business and extend its operations internationally. Essentially, that question is somewhat incomplete, because we would need to conduct a more thorough assessment on the applicant's assets, their business history, their business's performance as well in terms of their revenue and turnover. So for someone to just invest in a business, that alone will not necessarily qualify you automatically for the business innovation and investor visa, particularly in the business innovation stream. The second question is, I recently heard that we don't need 200,000 funding for the startup. This is for the entrepreneur stream. What documents do I need to apply for the business innovation stream, entrepreneur stream? First, that is correct, and this has been covered in the webinar. However, what's important to note is that even though from 1 July 2021, there is no legislative requirement for the applicant to show that they have received external funding of 200,000 from a number of approved entities, the relevant state that you want to apply to nominate you may still have those requirements. So it's really important to note that. And for New South Wales, for instance, they will want you to show some level of external funding, and they will also want you to show that that external funding was obtained from a number of their approved entities as well. Okay, so the next question is, what is the requirement for the skills immigrant now? Can you find a sponsor for someone who is already in Australia and just about to finish his degree as an IT? Unfortunately, LegalVision doesn't assist applicants to find a sponsor or an Australian business to sponsor them. We are a law firm, so we can only provide legal advice. And again, we would have to conduct an eligibility assessment to determine what visa options would be available to you. Okay, the next question is, do you need to have a running business prior to the provisional visa subclass 188? Yes, you do if you want to apply for the business innovation stream and potentially the business investor stream as well. And the reason for that is you actually have to demonstrate your business history as well. So if you haven't actually had any experience in managing or owning businesses before, then that stream would probably not be suitable for you. And as I sort of explained in the slide, one of the criteria is that you have to show that your main qualifying business has had a turnover of at least that there is a certain amount, 500,000, or for different state, a bit more, for the 2 years out of the last 4 fiscal years. Okay, so the questions are coming in about targeted industry. What is regulator in detail? I mean, not targeted industry is regarding 188A stage or 888A stage. Is it a must or preferred to run a targeted industry business? I think you mean you're referring to New South Wales nomination criteria. So as I explained, each state will have their own specific criteria. For the purposes of this webinar, we really only had time to cover New South Wales. Now, New South Wales will want applicants to show that their businesses will operate in one of the target sectors. So if the business doesn't, or your proposed business doesn't, then another state might be more suited. But that also means that you would have to commit to living in that state as well. Another question is, I may be eligible for the 188E. The 188E is the entrepreneurial stream. Does New South Wales accept partnership businesses? They may, but again, we would have to do a bit more of a thorough assessment around what that business is. Next question is there a minimum investment for business innovation stream 188 in terms of buying a business in Australia? And do you need FIRB approval? There is no minimum investment of what business that you can purchase or the amount of money that you can invest into the business. That you can purchase an existing business for or outlay the money for establishing a new business. It's more that for New South Wales, they will also require you to show that you've made additional business investment commitment in the sum of 500,000 if you want to migrate to Sydney, or 300,000 if you want to locate to a regional area. FIRB approval may be needed, but again, we'd have to conduct an assessment around that as well. The next question is, if an applicant wants to use their Australian business or businesses as main businesses to meet the 188 requirements, can they use the same businesses to meet the 888 visa requirements? Yes, they can. So you can actually nominate up to 2 main qualifying businesses for the purposes of both visas. And so typically you would want to pick, your most profitable, most successful businesses in that case then. The next question is the visa restricted just to those few businesses target sectors? Again, this depends if you want New South Wales to nominate you. So typically under the migration regulations, there are no stipulations on what types of businesses that you can establish or you can purchase. But if you require New South Wales to nominate you, they do want those businesses to be in a target sector. Now, having said that, there are other states as well, and other states may not have target sectors, and they may very well have a more liberal approach around what businesses that you can purchase or establish for the purposes of them nominating you. Again, we would have to conduct an assessment. As you can appreciate, there's 5 other states as well. They do have all different criterias as well. And that's part of the initial eligibility assessment, is that we perform that assessment for you. And then we can assess whether which states are relevant to you. So the last question, I think, is you mentioned a 7 to 9 month time frame on the 188, but I see a 22-month processing time on the IMI website. Is there a way to speed it up, and how long do you think it will take from start to PR? Okay, so the processing time on the Department of Home Affairs website is indicative. And yes, even our time frame is indicative too. There are many variables to that, meaning that it could take longer to actually receive state nomination. It could take longer to actually compile and prepare all your documentation. It could take longer to receive the invitation from the Department of Home Affairs. So these processing timeframes are not set in stone. They can take longer, they can take shorter. It's really important to note that. Sort of the time frame from then being granted your subclass 188 provisional visa to permanent residency is really dependent on the stream that you want to elect. So the 188 visa is now going to be valid for 5 years. Pre 1 July 2021, it was actually only valid for 4 years. And for some streams, it's possible to extend that provisional visa further. And most applicants would want to do that if they're not able to meet the criteria for the permanent residency stage. So again, it really depends on your specific situation, what you are doing while on the provisional visa to fulfill those requirements, and then eventually meet the permanent residency threshold. But if I was to give you the significant investor stream, for instance, okay, which is probably a bit more simplified, which is as long as the applicant invests 5 million into the compliant significant investments in the core designations, and that's usually managed by the fund manager, then after 3 years, as long as they continue to invest that same amount into those complying investment funds, they can then consider applying for permanent residency. And again, once you go through that process of actually submitting the state nomination, waiting for the invitation and submitting the application, it can still take several months for it to be granted as well. There is no way to really speed up the process, unfortunately. But what is really important to know is that these visas, according to the Department of Home Affairs, are prioritized. They do very much want to support applicants to achieve their objectives for the purposes of this visa. So they will do their best to try and expedite it as best as they can. But we unfortunately are not able to give you a sort of concrete processing timeline. Okay, so let me tell you a bit about LVConnect Pro membership. And this is all the legal assistance that your business actually needs at a price that you can actually afford. And it includes various services as well, such as unlimited document drafting, unlimited legal advice consultations, company incorporation and trust setup. So this is very pertinent if you actually want to if you are eligible for the business innovation stream and you want to establish a business here, we can assist you in all the legalities of setting up your business. It also includes employment and HR support as well. So anyone who watches this webinar is eligible to receive a complimentary consultation to discuss how LVConnect Pro can help your business with a range of services and also corporate immigration. Now, and you can redeem a special offer when you sign up. So you can book a strategy session after this webinar or at a later date, and don't forget to complete the survey as well. What I also need to note is that if you also have watched this seminar and you want to have a private consultation with me about your eligibility for the Business Innovation and Investor Stream Visa, there will be some discounts that apply to that consultation as well. So we look forward to assisting you. So thank you everyone very much for your time. I hope that was a very informative webinar for you. That really only covered sort of the iceberg or the surface of the iceberg really. So there often is a lot more to consider for this type of visa. So obviously if you need any assistance, we're more than happy to assist.